I was born in Wellsville, Ohio, October the 4th, 1925 at 2 a.m. My father came from Italy, and he arrived in New York when he was 6. At the age of 9, he went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad at 3 cents an hour as a water boy. And he ended up working there for 50 years. Not as a water boy, but different jobs, you know. We moved to a town called Stowe, Ohio. Dad and my grandfather built a house out of railroad lumber. My childhood life was great. We'd had acreage, you know, and the Depression. Everybody was pretty close then. We had a neighbor that had 5 acres, and he turned the 5 acres over to the community, and we'd all plant gardens in that 5 acres. Then we'd all harvest it together, and like my mom would put on a dinner for the different ladies would have dinners when we was harvesting stuff. So
when we were growing up, we were countrified at that time. Stowe was just almost all farmland. And where we grew up in our area, my family was raising animals to sustain our life, but we ate well because my father provided through the means of the garden. The thing that I remember about John as a boy, even when we were in the grade schools, was he was an energetic young fellow. He seemed to have a lot of steam, and then even in the early grades, junior high area, he was just a little older than I. He would be playing football and boxing and doing all sorts of activities.
I played a lot of football, you know, but I was pretty good at it. You know, I was very, very fast. They called me the deer. And then I got in silver gloves. And then from there I went into the golden gloves. And then after that was done, then we started boxing for different organizations like country clubs, and they'd throw money in the ring to us, you know, and we pick up some pretty good change. And then I started fighting in higher up, and I don't know, 7 or 8 fights, and I won them all. But the last one made me quit. Well, I got in with the wrong guy. I broke my nose right in the first round, and then all the blood was going down in me, and my dad said, "That's it, you're done, no more boxing." I went to Dad and asked him, I said, I want to, you know, everybody, my brothers, uncles, they were all heading for the service. And I told Dad, I said, I want to go. And he said, no. But the minute I turned 18, I didn't need his permission anymore. So I went on in.
My childhood, actually, looking back, it was, we get used to a certain childhood, and to me, it was great, actually. It was very good. The town I grew up was called Polana on the Czech, and Hungarian was Polano. And now under the Ukrainians, that area belongs to Ukraine, it's called Polyana. It's on a Carpathian, they call it Carpathian Rus. I came from a family where 9 children. There were 4 boys and 5 girls. My father was in business, in the meat business. He made it so we all had to get up very early in the morning. Like from the time I was like, I could remember 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. As soon as anybody got old enough, they helped in the business and on a farm. We grew all our own food. We literally had everything. We canned everything for the winter. My mother worked from morning till night. And by the way, we didn't have any gas, we didn't have any electricity. Looking back, my father was more, like in those days, some fathers actually were more authoritarian. When he looked at you, you just, there was no such thing as talking back to your parents, period. We came from that kind of culture. Somehow or another, the Czech Republic was, at the time, a very good country, okay? Because we had democracy. My formative years when I started school, first of all, because of my siblings, they always loved Czechoslovakia. They just had a natural love for it. Why? Because we were treated like citizens instead of singling out as Jews and so on. When the war broke out, Hitler took the Czech part immediately. Most people in the United States or any place, they don't realize that Hitler had a lot of countries that joined him, what they call them, the Axis powers later. And Hungary was one of them. I'll just deal with Hungary. And the Hungarians, because they were allied with them, the Hungarians, that was their gift. They got our part. Our life under Hungarians turned out to be nothing but lousy, okay, to put it in a simple word. Because they came out, what the Germans instituted in Germany against anti-Jewish laws, they adopted the same thing. As they came out with anti-Semitic laws, special law against Jews. And the first thing they did, they took away everybody's livelihood. They had a business, they gave it to somebody, one of their collaborators, just throughout the country. They just did that. And this was just for starters. And the funniest thing is, in my father's case, they overlooked us. They didn't take away his license, because he had to have a license to stay in business. And they didn't take away his license. He was the only one, not only in our town, but all over, okay? And somehow they overlooked him. And so we were in business. However, what happened is that to do our work, we had to do everything in secret. We didn't know whom to trust. So we did everything in cloak of darkness, actually 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, not even like 10 o'clock, but 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. By morning, we had to make sure everything was cleaned up and the whole thing is gone, because the detectives or somebody would surprise us and come and search. You know how they would come? They would come, the police would come with bayonets. In those days, they had bayonets from World War I. They were literally this long. And they would come and actually go into the hay and on a loft and all to see if you did something, okay? They used to do it periodically. So we always had to be on our toes, okay? And so this is the way we lived.
I took my physical, and they said that I could be in the Army, but I would be on limited duty on account of my eyes. And I said, what's that mean? They said, well, you'll never have to go overseas. You won't be in combat, nothing. And I said, oh. But I wanted to go in. And so I went in, I went to Fort Benjamin Harrison. I was there 15 days, getting uniform and getting ready. And then they sent me to Camp Barkley, Texas. And that was all medical training. And I said, what am I doing here? Well, you're in the medics. And I said, well, why in the world would I be in the medics, you know? Because when I was 16, 17, I was driving a truck for a little construction company. And I thought that's where I'd go in the engineers, you know. It didn't work that way. So I went to Camp Barkley, Texas, and that's where I took my basic down there, about 16 weeks, I think. And then I was assigned to 71st Infantry Division in Fort Benning, Georgia. Sure, we got the basics. You know, we was taught how to wrap a head wound and put a tourniquet on and give shots of morphine, things like that. And then we left there and went to New Jersey, got on a boat and went across the pond. We was on what we called a banana boat. It was so small, and there was 2,500 of us on that boat. And we were under the water more than we were on top. And that just so small and that much down there. And everybody on there was sick, but me. And when I was in Camp Kilmer, there was an old merchant marine there, and he told me, he said, John, he said, before you get on this ship, go get yourself a couple boxes of soda crackers. And he said, you start eating them, you won't get seasick. And he was right. On the way over, one of our ships got hit, sister ships. And we got orders to get ready to go overboard. And they had the ropes over the side of the ship. And it was pitch black, and I never seen anything so black as that was that night. And but thank God we didn't have to go over. The guys I was with did the combat, and the medics, the frontline medics, which were combat medics, is always 4 of us together. And the reason for that is it takes 4 men to carry a litter. You know, we was all kids. I guess I was the youngest one. We were like glue. Everything I went through, they went through. We were like glue. I mean, we were the squad. We were the 4. Went into Le Havre, France. That's where we got all ready to go into combat. We went into France a ways. And then after a little ways, we run into that Siegfried line with the concrete blocks, the barbed wire fence. We got the first right over that into the German border, and they were really letting us have it. Well, from that point forward until the war was almost over with, it was just a continuance taking care of the wounded, you know.
When the Germans first asked for the Jewish population, the Hungarians didn't give us up. Although they didn't treat us good, but you know, they said no. But then they sent Adolf Eichmann, and he was a very good negotiator. In 2 months, they shipped out almost 450,000 people from the first group they picked in our area, the occupied area. The other ones, they were going in slowly to Hungary. And they picked us up. The Hungarians, troops, police picked us up. It was no big deal. Nobody fought back. We had no weapons. It wasn't like in the United States. People say, why didn't you fight back? First of all, if you fought back, they would kill your whole family, number one. Or you would kill, maybe not the whole family, maybe everybody, okay? And in our religion, we are brought up a certain way that you cannot risk your life, somebody else's life because of you, okay? Very simple. They put us in a ghetto, And like I said, it was done very quickly. And we were in the ghetto a very short time. And in my case, I remember, I think we did about 5 weeks. One day they pull up a train, they put us on a train, and our boxcar was 125 people. But most boxcars had 125, 135 people in a boxcar. I'm talking about people very old, a lot of children, because like I said, we came from big families. And they put us in a train, locked the door, and we're going, this time we realized we're going eastward. We finally came to Auschwitz. In my case, we came during the night. Now, we never heard of Auschwitz. As soon as they started screaming, raus, schnell, schnell in German. Now, that much we picked up, but there were capos with sticks threatening you. We got on the ground, and we're surrounded by floodlights, and immediately, as soon as we're on the ground, everybody's holding out to each other not to lose a child or not to lose each other, because it was like you're talking about a mass of people from those boxcars. Immediately we were surrounded by guards with the rifles literally on the trigger. The finger was on the trigger, I should say. And if that was not enough to scare the hell out of, plus the lights, on top of it they had these killer German police dogs. I mean, they were like, if you would let them off the leash, they would just take a person and tear them apart. That's how they were. And we were innocent civilian people from a civilian society. I mean, give me a break. So as soon as we were on the ground, they separated the men from the women. Women on one side, the men on the other. They lined us up, and there was this officer with shiny boots, like out of a movie. They were always very sharp looking, very proud. And as he started going goose fashion, in front of him, he would just go like this or like that. If you went to the left, you went to your death. If you went to the right, you were picked for work. And I passed. Now, I didn't know how fortunate I was, because I found out when I got to the barracks the next day, I found out that I didn't see any of the kids that I knew. Yet we came in the same train, okay? But I didn't think about anything about it. Because if I survived, chances are they did. I found out most of them did not. My father and brother did, okay? But as soon as we got on the ground, we're separated. Men, like I said, we were picked for work, so we were moved over to a certain area. And while we were just standing in this area, I noticed my mother and my two younger sisters were like some empty space in between, and they were in that group with the women there. And I noticed my mother and my sisters. I said to my father, you know something? I'm gonna run across that little space, and I'm gonna join them. Because there'll be a problem with food, and I'm a little older, I'm more capable, so I'll go with them. My father said, okay. So I made a dash across this space, right? But before I got there, in the middle of the space, when I was making the dash, this capo comes and he grabs me by the back of my neck, he throws me back and starts threatening me, you can't go there! You know, really nasty. And I came back to my father, I still remember, and I said to him, could you imagine, I found out that the capos were Polish Jews. Could you imagine he's Jewish and he could be so nasty, he wouldn't let me go there? Well, I came back to the barrack next morning, I realized what he did. He just saved my life right there. That's why sometimes, through no luck of your own, something like this happens, it's hard to believe. But I remember exactly the way it happened. And till this day, just imagine if that man didn't stop me right there, I would have gone to the other side. And once I was there, they would never let me off, okay? Very simple.
They had some more guys. We got up there and there was 8 of them. I got to those 8 soldiers. So we picked out 2, each one of us. There was 8 and 4 of us, so we picked out 2. And mine was a stomach wound and 1 head wound. And then I had to make the decision which one of these guys I was going to treat first. Well, the one guy was, his stomach was laying on the ground, and I knew then that he wasn't going to make it. And so my decision was to take the one with the head wound. And I got treating him, and the first thing he says to me, he says, "You think I'll always be blind?" And oh gosh. I said, "No, you're not that bad, you know, your sight will come back." But then the guilt part come in when I don't know if I made the right decision. Should have, maybe I've taken care of the stomach wound first. And you carry that with you forever. And that's, you know, that's just the beginning. From then on, it wasn't fun. We went out like midnight in a bad night, rain and everything, and these guys were wounded out there in this field. And the 3 kids, the 3 Italian boys and me, we volunteered at about midnight to go out and see how many we could get in so they could get in the hospital. It was raining and muddy. And the Germans were shooting like about 4 feet above our heads, you know, tracers. And we couldn't stand up. So I put the guy on the top. I'm 134 pounds. He's probably 180. I put him on top of me, and then I wedged my way out with my heels and my elbows and got him out. We got them all in anyhow. We got orders to move up a little ways because there was some wounded soldiers. And we got there, and there was several of them laying on a bank. And my first one was a soldier with a leg wound, and so I got to working on him. And over to the right of me, there was a soldier completely covered with a blanket, so that meant he was deceased. And I swore I saw that blanket move. So I kept working on my guy, and the same thing happened again. So the minute I got done working with him, I went over and I pulled the blanket down, and this guy was still alive. But from his waist down, there was nothing left. And well, when I pulled the blanket down, the odor, the gangrene hit me, and I passed out. I'll tell you, I was a combat medic, and I really got into some gory messes, but they were nothing compared to what laid ahead of us.
I stayed in Auschwitz a very short time, and they took us to a place called Melk. Well, this is where my permanent camp was. And our job was, we were building tunnels under a huge mountain. You would think we would have a jackhammer, picks and shovels. I'm talking about a huge mountain with a huge tunnel, okay? And how in the world we did this, I don't know. And you had to work, and you couldn't even straighten up. You just had to, like this here, dig and shovel the stuff. And this went on every shift, 3 shifts. During the winter, for some reason, the odds were against you much more. So every month, we had 3,000 people come and replace them that perished the month before. So you knew that you could only last so long. But in the meantime, you push, you just go. And I often wonder about that how you, and I was not a big kid. I was not very strong either. but somehow I did it. They had it all figured again, scientifically, that the way they feed you and the way they work you, that your lifespan is just worth X amount of time, okay? No matter how healthy you are, how strong you are. That was their program. Kill you, but get work done. Now it's funny, you have to remember, I was a kid, I was not educated, I was not very worldly, and I could look at your face and I knew right away it's over for you. In less than a year, we built 7 tunnels. They were not finished, but we already had the cavity in there, deep into the mountain. We were evacuated from Elk back to Mauthausen. And we came to Mauthausen, and the first thing they did, as soon as we got to Mauthausen, they separated the Jewish population from the others. And that really, I remember, we didn't even talk about it, but it scared the daylight out of me. By that time already, I was definitely not a Boy Scout. I mean, I knew the score. And I said, why would they separate us? They're gonna kill us. They took us, on the side of the camp, there was like a very neglected area, like a downhill. And all they had was there like thorn bushes, full of like wild growth, And there was like a little patch of grass you were able to lie down or something. All we had was a light blanket, and that was it. It was spring of the year, but it was cold. And we figured sooner or later they're going to massacre us. We knew about it. We were not kidding ourselves. Instead, we're going on a march. By that time, we were like, no, whatever they do to us, this is it. There's not much you could do. But it's a very funny thing. When they came up with the march, many people were already literally falling down. They couldn't stand up. I mean, it was just that bad. And when they told us we were going on a march, I sort of remember getting a certain, you ever get like sometimes somebody says, I saw the light. All of a sudden, I felt like I was elated. I can't explain it. I had a certain, something that's almost like a biblical explanation. I have no explanation for it, because things were just a bit awful. Now, when we're getting this food in the morning or whatever, there was once a day, and the guy, he had to take a ladle and literally take the breadcrumbs, put in the palm of your hand, okay? And then I remember, put the palm of your hand and you look, there was white, blue, and green mildew, piece of mildew in there. And guess what you did? And that was it. And the march was very simple. We started marching from Mauthausen to Gunskirchen. Now, of course, we didn't know where we were going. We were just marching. And most of the time, we were going through country roads. And like I say, we were just in such bad shape, many people would just literally fall down. They couldn't get up. Everybody had their face looked like The Walking Dead. I mean, we just had no color. I mean, it was just completely just in lousy shape, let's put it this way, about as bad as anybody can get. And we had incidents where a person would fall down, they couldn't get up. God would just pick up his rifle and shoot them. And they were not SS, by the way, they were Wehrmacht, which was supposed to be, they were the better guys. I didn't see them, okay? We had guards, Wehrmacht all the time, and they were just as mean and nasty as anybody else. Just as soon as shoot you as look at you. It was a country road, so it was, in those days they still used wagons to bring the potatoes from the field. There was a potato on the ground, fell down from a wagon, okay? And we were marching columns, like columns of 5. And this one fellow, he was like almost next to me. And he saw the potato, he took a leap for it. Another guy from the other side saw the same potato, he took a jump for it as well. Guess what? They started fighting over the potato. while we were marching. And the guard saw that, and the guard was like, I was on the outside row, and he was like, just next to me. He saw them fighting. He picked up his rifle, aimed one, shot one man right in the face, just like that. Now that I cannot forget. Because this was an ordinary man that was supposed to be an ordinary soldier, not even SS. And he did that. Came to Gunskirchen, there was like puddles because it was like kind of sort of a forest, but it was the spring of the year and it was rain. And the puddles were not that big, but they were a little deep. And people would literally walk in. By that time, some of them were so bad, like their eyes weren't even open. They would just walk around almost like zombies. And they would walk into this puddle of water and would fall down. And normally, we were not that heartless even then. We'd go and help them, right? We didn't. Deliberately, we didn't go and help him. You know why? Once his head was in the water, we figured, let him go, let him die, because he's already better off. And we would deliberately walk away from it and not help him. It wasn't because we were heartless, I think. That's hard to imagine, but that's the way it was.
I'd say around the 28th of April, maybe. We thought we was done with all the wound, because the Germans started surrendering, and they're throwing their rifles down. And we were getting 12, 13-year-old kids surrendering, We were all pretty well happy, it's going to be over with. A couple of weeks at the most. Then we got orders that they didn't say we had wounded soldiers. They said that kind of like an emergency up ahead. And on the 4th of May, we got into this wooded area. And it was misty and foggy. And then all of a sudden, we started getting a horrible, horrible smell. We thought maybe it was a slaughterhouse or something, because it's like you smell them back here. Then all of a sudden, there was 2 or 3 people. They had these funny-looking clothes on. They got out of the camp, because the German SS guys left a couple of days before we got there. And so we had to keep going. There's nothing we could do. But then when we got to Gunskirchen, inside the camp, it was just, you can't imagine what it was like. And then the further we got in, this odor got worse. And then all of a sudden there was people everywhere. Some of them broke through the gate, and got out. And they might go from here to the timber there and fall, they'd die right there. And thousands of them. We had orders, we're not going any further. The medics were staying there, taking care of those people. God, they were grabbing us and hugging us and kissing our boots, our feet. Myself and my 3 buddies, when we got there, there was a ditch, and it was full of Jewish people. One guy, I sat down on the ground and I picked his, I held him in my arms. Couldn't hardly see his eyes, they were so far back in his head. I had a can of sea rations. I took little chunks, maybe a quarter of an inch, and I started feeding that to him. The bad part about it was when I was feeding him, he'd give me a little smile, and then he died right there. When the Germans knew we were coming, and they wanted to hide all the evidence they could get rid of, and they threw them in this ditch, and then they'd cover them up. Well, our job was to get down in that trench and separate the live. They were going to bury him alive and get the live ones out of that trench. And it just, I just, today I don't even know how I did that, you know, it just, but, and then we got a lot of those out, but then there was an open field there, and they had round holes for latrines. These people had diarrhea, dysentery, everything imaginable. We got sick, couldn't help from getting sick. I think shock too. You know, shock from seeing something that we never dreamed could ever happen, you know. Coming from a family like I did, you know, a lot of love and all that stuff, and then run into something like that would just, you know, used to bother me when my granddad cut the chicken head off. I think maybe then I was 19, and I went from a young man to a very, very old man in a couple of weeks. Those 2 weeks changed my whole look on life, my whole, well, it affected me. I'm 90 years old now, and it affected me all those years.
One day, somebody found out, the notice that the guards were gone. We didn't believe it. We didn't see an American. I said, well, how could Americans be here? We didn't see any. And we were afraid to walk out the gate. Some people did leave. We decided not to. Why? Figured if we go out the gate, there are machine guns waiting and they'll mow us down. This is how our mind worked by that time. So we didn't go, deliberately. We decided not to go. Next day, we finally walked out. First thing we did is look for food, of course. The Americans were there, but we only saw them when we came out on the street, but we were not interested. We saw them, we were happy they were there. We felt much better, of course, but we were looking for food. Before anything, we needed food. When you're hungry, yeah, I'll just give you an example. If somebody's hungry like we were, that if somebody gave you a loaf of bread, a 5-pound loaf of bread, you wouldn't want to leave anything behind. You would just want to eat the whole thing because you feel like you'll never get it again. You got to eat it. But I had about, I don't know how many, 3 or 4, and I stopped. I had a certain fifth sense that hit me, and I stopped. Don't get me wrong, as a pig, I would have eaten the whole thing because I was really, first time I got food, okay? And I remember feeling that way and I stopped. Where I got that fifth sense that I stopped is beyond me, because usually when you're in a case like this, you never had a full stomach. You know, you just want to fill it. I mean, it's just the way it is. And one of the guys, by the way, he had an uncle. He was already older. He was like around 50-ish or so. And he attached himself with us too. And he ate a little too much. A day or two later, I found out he died. The soldiers were very alive. They were jumping in and out of the jeeps. I was, as a kid, I was 60 years old by now. Very impressed. They were full of, oh my God, they were like a sight for sore eyes. Elation that you cannot put in a bottle, you cannot describe it, because it's like a once in a lifetime thing, okay? And that was a very, very big thing. Anyway, by that time, we found out later, after we had our own meal, that the Americans set up a camp and that we would go there. So we found out where it was, and we found the camp. It was an old army camp, and they turned into, for us, to get us back on our feet. So I was all anxious to go back to my hometown. While we were in this place, there were rehab place, if you want to call it. One day we were out there. By that time I felt better. We saw this open truck pull up, and the truck had a sign, was from the Czech Republic, okay? We got excited. Oh my God, it had something to do with the Czech Republic. Hey, what better vehicle, we'll take advantage. So we went up to the truck, and we didn't care where it was going. As long as it was going out of Austria and back to the Czech Republic. We went to the Czech Republic. When we got there, one of the guys, like I say, a lot of Czechs, everybody, all the Czechs knew that they were spent time in Mauthausen. Somehow they got a hold of some kind of black ink or something, and they made a big sign, Mauthausen. Anyway, we came into this square. In Europe, the cities are made like a round, they were like a squares, almost all the Europe. And all of a sudden, we were there. The fact we were on Czech soil, we felt entirely better all of a sudden. Out comes this man from a restaurant, and the owner, and he looks at us. He invited us into his restaurant. Come in, tablecloths, silverware, stuff was disbelief. My God, we are human beings. I remember feeling that way. And he served us this food, and needless to say how grateful you were, because more than that, the man was so decent.
I tried to commit suicide in '49. I couldn't handle it no more. I was driving my mom and dad crazy. Getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, turning the radio on full blast, not even know I did it. I was punching holes in the walls. I was hiding under the bed. I felt like, I remember I was in my dad's yard, and something came up, and all of a sudden it hit me. I said, I'm making these people really miserable. I'm making their life miserable, worrying about me and everything. A toolbox was sitting there, and they had a screwdriver, and I grabbed a screwdriver. And they rushed me to the St. Thomas Hospital in Akron, Ohio. They said about that further and would have been gone. And I believe Mom and Dad got a hold of the Army, and they came to the house, and then I went to Fort Meade, Maryland, to the medical psychiatric ward there. There was this nurse in there who was from Benton, Iowa, but she was from California. And she was a psychiatric nurse, and we got pretty well acquainted while I was a patient. And then I said, well, when I get out of here, sometimes you have a little time. I said, maybe we could go have dinner together or something. And I don't know how long it was, 6 months, something like that. And she ran into me and she said, well, I'm ready to have that lunch with you. And 40 years later, we were still having lunch together. She knew her job, that's for sure, and she knew what kind of shape I was in, my whole history, and everything. And but she must have seen some good in me or something, because my wife knew how to treat me. She knew my good when I'm good and when I wasn't good and all that, and she had a way about her that she made me feel comfortable. And she would talk to me about the Holocaust. She'd ask questions just like you're doing about it, I think about it all the time yet today, about did I make the right choice? Did I give the right treatment? Then I thought, well, geez, I wish they would have taught me how to do this better, and maybe I wasn't doing a good enough job. And this guilt stuff bothers you all your life, too. Did I make the right choice? And then 75 years ago, I'm wondering the same thing. I went back home, and I wasn't getting anywhere there, and the folks moved to California then, and they called me up and told me, come on out here, there's a lot of work, and I could stay with them or my sister for a while but I got out there and I was ready to come home right then. I just, too much traffic, too many people, it wasn't my cup of tea. And that's when I started heading for the hills. I'd disappear like 2 or 3 months at a time. I'd go up in the hills and take my little pickup and away I'd go. And I'd hibernate for maybe 3 months at a time. I was up there, up around Mount Shasta, and there's a lot of lakes up there and stuff. I hate to admit it, but I got to be a pretty good hobo. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to go in somewhere and ask for some lunch meat, loaf of bread or something, And then in 1961, I started having, why, I don't know, but everything started coming back again. Something must have triggered it, And so then I took a whole bottle of whatever was in that bottle of Valium, and they rushed me to some aid station, I think, and they pumped my stomach out. And the next thing you know, I'm in the mental hospital there in California, and they put me in a padded cell for a couple of weeks in there, and I think the third week they decided that I was coming along pretty good then, and they discharged me. Well, they at that time they didn't do much of anything. They weren't. There was no such thing then as post-traumatic stress. I was either crazy or nuts, or that's the words they used.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is actually a relatively new diagnosis. It was not an official diagnosis until 1980, but the notion of trauma and post post-traumatic stress disorder actually goes back thousands of years. There's a reference to it in the Iliad by Homer. There's a scene in which the Greek warrior Achilles, during a battle, he's fighting and he sees a dear friend of his cut down and slain in that battle. And Homer's description of the reaction that Achilles went through in the ensuing weeks and months fully fits with our modern day notion of post-traumatic stress disorder. The first physicians to actually write about what we now refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder were physicians in Napoleon's army. And they referred to it as nostalgie, the French word for nostalgia. And their notion was that it was a form of homesickness. And some American physicians went over to consult with these physicians and brought back with them this notion of nostalgia, and was actually adopted by the U.S. military. And in the Civil War, in the early part of the war, there was a casualty category that the Union Army had for nostalgia. But there was such a high rate of use of that diagnosis in the early part of the Civil War, and they were having an attrition of soldiers being diagnosed with that the Surgeon General of the Union Army eliminated that as a casualty category. There was also a popular term that was coined during the Civil War that referred to what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is soldier's heart. Most people are familiar with terms that came after that. In World War I, there was shell shock. World War II, battle fatigue are the terms that were used most and referred to certain symptoms. It was certainly common to institutionalize people, and it was more like they were being warehoused. There was not activity programs that the patients were provided with, and so it was more of a sanitarium type approach. The war in Vietnam, no single term was used consistently over the course of the war to refer to post-traumatic stress disorder. Early on, there was still reference to battle fatigue, and later there was a term that was used was post-Vietnam syndrome, still referring to post-traumatic stress disorder. But it's interesting to think about. The war in Vietnam officially ended in 1975, and so as I mentioned earlier, the post-traumatic stress disorder was not made official until 1980. So that means, as we know, many people develop post-traumatic stress disorder during the war and in other situations. And what that means is when they were seen by a medical or a mental health professional, they were diagnosed with something other than post-traumatic stress disorder. I work with many Vietnam War veterans and have heard lots of stories about what they experienced even both before and after 1980, and can often in those early years continue to get a reaction even from professionals, including mental health professionals. Oh, it's all in your head, which family members often would react with also, because so little was understood about it. From what I can tell, there was little progress until 9/11, the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. There was such great concern at that time, from what I've been told, that there would be a nationwide epidemic of post-traumatic stress disorder in reaction to these attacks and the threat of many more happening, because of all the uncertainty there was at those times, that Congress reacted unusually quickly and released a large amount of funding for research into PTSD.
When I first came to the States, I didn't speak to anybody about the Holocaust period. In fact, I had a couple of friends that lived in the same town. Once in a while, we'd have dinner like on Saturday night or Sunday. And we never had one conversation about the camps. They had children, I had children. We never discussed it, never talked about it, never had a conversation. Furthermore, I shut it off so much, I decided, I just, not consciously, unconsciously, I decided not to talk about it. As a matter of fact, I had a cousin that was with me in the same barracks most of the time, till the evacuation. We never had one conversation about our experience in the camp, not one. But anyway, I moved to Washington, and I was anxious to go to the Holocaust Museum because I heard so much about it. Besides, after all, I knew about the Holocaust. And I used to come to 14th Street, which is near the museum, with my wife, and I used to turn around. I say, I can't go in. I turn around. Happened to me several times, okay? It took me 3 years before I walked into the museum. I knew it would be upsetting. So about 3 years later, I finally walked in. One day I came to the corner, and I was ready to walk, turn around again. This time I said, you know something, I have to just do it. So I walked into the museum, and when I was in there, I met the guy that was head of the survivors. He introduced himself, and I told him who I was. He says, you have to join the survivors group. I said, what? I'm telling you, I never heard the word survivor. Besides, they have a group? Well, I didn't realize in Washington, they had in the vicinity, they had a lot more survivors, like Silver Springs or whatever. And he talked me into it. I said, okay. And so I went to a meeting or two, and I became a Holocaust survivor. Okay, that's the first time I became a Holocaust survivor. And at first, I wasn't even much into it. I figured, this is ridiculous. Nobody cares, or nobody, why bother? I finally, after I was in the museum for quite a while, and they had a speakers bureau. At first, because I was never a speaker, I didn't like to be in front of an audience. It really took me a long time to get over that. And finally, I started speaking, and I belonged to the speakers bureau. And then I realized something, that when I was in camp, I remember thinking that if I ever first of all, we didn't expect to get out alive. That's what I say. The way we were thinking, there was no way they would let us go alive. But I remember that I promised that if I do survive, I'll tell the world what happened. But that was in my back of my head, and I forgot about it. Then when I was in the museum, I remembered that promise. So I said, here, I could fulfill my promise. So that is when I started to get serious about it. And I got more into it, and of course I got more comfortable, and the rest is history, as they say, Sure. But that's basically how I got into the Holocaust so-called museum. But more than that, once I got into it, I started speaking, I'll tell you why I like to do it. I speak to kids a lot. I'm talking about junior high or high school or college, like in different parts of the country. It doesn't matter if it's in New Orleans or Tennessee or the museum itself. Like now I have a job every Friday. I go sit at a desk and they want to speak to a Holocaust survivor. I am one of them. There's two of us. And young kids, as early as 7, 8 years old, they care. And that gives you, like, how could you quit? They care. These are young kids. Now, like I say, I could be in North Carolina, could be in Tennessee, and the same is true all over the country. I have never been disappointed. You know, the crowds were always big, and more than that, you could hear a pin drop, you know. And I'll tell you, seeing this, that the people are really, I have this belief that most American people are just good people. That shows on the kids. So to me, the fact that I could talk to them and they understand and they care, I did not do nothing but something good.
When we came home, we took our medals off, we did this, we put everything in the family cedar chest, and that was it. And it's hard to get a World War II veteran to talk. If I went to the Legion, the bar or something to have a drink, war talk, everywhere I went it was war. 1970 when I come to Benton, a guy comes up and he wanted me to join the Legion. And I said, no. I said, I'm not allowed. I said, I never was in the service. You know, I told a lot of people that over the years because I didn't want to hear about it. And about 2 weeks later, he comes to me and he said, John, he said, I'm going to tell you something. You can get in a lot of trouble. I said, what did I do? He said, I'm talking about the feds. You can get in trouble. He said, you went to the courthouse and claimed a veteran's homestead. And he said, that can get you nailed good. Then I had to tell him, I joined the Legion then. It took them 6 years, I think, or this teacher and the VFW commander to get me to come into a classroom and talk to the kids about the Holocaust.
John moved back from California in the mid-60s, somewhere in that area. I can't remember the exact date and time, and I was still in the service at the time. But I happened to be helping my brother-in-law out on his farm fixing some fences, and John lived right across the road from him. And he came over and talked to Bob, my brother-in-law, and that, who was a Korean War veteran. And he and I talked a lot, and we got to know each other real well, John, because he's a, you know, he was a veteran, I was a veteran, you know, of course, still in service and all this. And we got to talking and got to know him and found out that he was in World War II, which was, back then there was a lot of World War II veterans still around, but they're getting fewer and fewer and far between now, which is a shame. But anyway, that's how I met John, and we got to talking to each other, and I had Kelly Steffen, who was a history teacher in high school up here. I knew her father-in-law really well, best friend of mine, and he and I did a lot of woodworking together and helping that. That was, of course, after I got out of the service. And Kelly asked me if I'd come and talk to the kids in the high school and talk to them about Vietnam and being in the service. And I said, Kelly, I really don't know what to say. She said, just come out and just start talking. I said, oh, well, Lordy, how do I do? You know, so anyway, I went down there, and in the meantime, she asked if I knew of anybody else. I said, well, I know a few veterans around, and I can get maybe a couple of them to come down and talk, you know, too. And I said, I know John Galtier real well, but I says, I don't know if he'll come and talk. Because John has had, for lack of a better word, I guess, problems with talking about the military, because he was a combat medic in World War II in Europe, and he went through for lack of a better word, he went through hell in World War II. And he was probably one of the nicest guys you ever wanted to meet and know, but he was really gun shy about talking about his experiences in Europe.
My first contact with John was through Vietnam veterans. I talked to John personally and asked him would he want to talk at our Veterans Day Assembly. And he said no, he had no desire to speak publicly about anything that he had been through. I bug people, that's what I do. So I just kept bugging him, and he one day decided he was ready for it.
I think it's helped me, you know, as far as talking about it and stuff, which I never could do or never would do. And she got me, her and this commander of the VFW got me started in it. And then she really impressed me when I went to the synagogue to talk, and she came. I tell them all the time, and you've helped me a lot more than I've helped you, you know. And it's true, you know. I think today that if it wouldn't have been for the students and the teacher, Kelly, that got me going in this, and that I would be different than what I am right now.
To me, you know, he could have curled up in a ball and he could have given up a long time ago. He's finally getting a chance to tell his story, and I just think that's got to be such a kind of a relief off his shoulders to know that he can tell his story and not be criticized for it, not be judged for it, but the fact that people are willing and want to hear what he has to say.
I think today that if it wouldn't have been for the students and the teacher, Kelly, that got me going in this, and that I would be different than what I am right now. I'd be more like I used to be. I'm glad I'm able to associate more with people, you know.
John, I think, has done much better down through the years because he has talked and opened up. John is one of these kind of people that he likes to help veterans, and he would do anything for any veteran, even if he didn't like, to use John, even if he didn't like the guy or the person, he would still help him because he's a veteran. And John was a service officer who helps veterans. That's his job. And he was in the American Legion as a service officer. And he was also service officer in the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and also in the AMVETS, and still is. He's been a service officer, gosh, as long as I can known him, and he's helped, I think, hundreds of veterans to try and get their benefits that is owed to them by the government. And he fills out paperwork, and he's asked me at times if I'd help him do things, and I wouldn't know what in the world I was doing, but I'd help him out, you know, because him and I got to really know each other down through the years, and he's about as nice a guy as you can ever come up with.
Attention to orders. Awarded to John L. Galtier, this 20th day of April, 1993, the Bronze Star Medal. Well assigned to Company B, 371st Medic Battalion, 71st Infantry Division in the European Theater. A company of infantry assigned to the 1st Battalion, 5th Regiment of the 71st Infantry Division was pinned down from hostile fire. The company sustained casualties and could not evacuate them. John and 3 other medics volunteered to go into the company while under a fire and assist where needed. John was able to drag several men to safety and administer aid. This happened on April 29th and 30th, 1945, between Regensburg and Strasbourg, Germany. John L. Galtier is a credit to his unit and the United States of America.